This is a safe space, right? Like a place where we recognize that everybody has different opinions on books, and sometimes our favorite book is a book that someone else doesn't love so much, right? Because I know a lot of you love this book, but I did not. I am currently obsessed with 80s dark fantasy, so I'm attempting to consume as much of it as possible. Books, movies, video games, all of it. And I just finished reading one that was highly requested, The Dragonlance Chronicles by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. Okay, technically speaking, I only read the first book in the trilogy, Dragons of Autumn Twilight, which came out in 1984. This book follows a band of adventurers who have reunited after years apart. But their reunion is cut short as they are set off on a new adventure after meeting a woman who has a magical blue healing staff. And this staff quickly leads them towards a lot of danger and the revelation that their world is on the brink of war. I fully thought I was gonna love this. I mean, I had just finished reading Dragonwing, the first book in the Deathgate cycle by the same authors, and I adored it. But unfortunately, this book was a miss for me across the board. And what I've come to realize over the last couple of days since I finished this book is that your enjoyment of it will probably greatly depend on where you meet it. Let me explain. Dragons of Autumn Twilight reads very much like someone played Dungeons & Dragons with their friends and then wrote down their adventure. And that makes a lot of sense because these authors went on to do a lot with Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons & Dragons, and this book was heavily inspired by D&D. For a lot of reasons, I am just not a huge Dungeons & Dragons fan, so that aspect of the book just did not resonate with me. I also had a really hard time with the fact that we essentially meet all of the main characters at once. And at the time we meet them, almost all of them already have connections to each other. And I found this made it really hard for me, a newcomer to their band, to really connect with any of them. I think it says a lot that at one point one of the characters meets their untimely doom, and it's very sad, and yet I felt nothing. I also think your enjoyment of this book might depend on where you meet it on your fantasy reading journey. I am aware that this book came out in the 1980s. And by the standards of this time, yeah, I'm sure this felt new and different and exciting. But remember, I am someone who reads fantasy books all the time, and I'm reading it in 2025. And by that standard, all of the characters feel very much like cookie-cutter stereotypes. And all of the plot lines feel highly derivative. A lot of you have mentioned to me that this was the first fantasy book that you ever read, or you read it in high school and loved it. And if I had read this in high school, or it was the first fantasy book I ever read, I think I would have found it brilliant. But as someone who has read hundreds of fantasy books at this point, the magic was unfortunately lost on me. I say all this to say that I don't think this is a bad book or series, but more so to say that it and I just sadly met in the wrong place at the wrong time. If you'll allow me one last, possibly hot take of this review, I don't actually think this is dark fantasy. The more fantasy I read, the more I start to categorize. And to me, Dragons of Autumn Twilight falls more into what I would call journey fantasy. The quintessential version of this, of course, being Lord of the Rings. This is a story about a band of adventurers going on an adventure. Whereas the more dark fantasy I consume, the more I've started to describe it as underdogs or anti-heroes attempting to survive their terrible circumstances or even world. Dark fantasies aren't necessarily about adventure. They're about just scraping by despite the odds. Think Dragonwing or Legend or Elden Ring. And Dragons of Autumn Twilight just never really hit that vibe for me. I love that so many of you love this. It just wasn't for me, and that's perfectly okay, right? Right? The good news is I still have a lot of dark fantasy to explore, and my opinion on it might change as we go. Now I just have to figure out which one to read next. Any suggestions?